Greetings, traveler. I'm glad to see you in my tavern. Here you may rest after a hard road, drink a mug of good ale, and listen to an old, honest witcher's tale, one that smells of smoke, winding roads, and silver coins. The road through northern Redania was long, winding, and half swallowed by fog. The last of the autumn leaves clung to the birches like gold coins refusing to fall, while cold mist rolled from the fields and pooled along the ruts in the path. Geralt rode in silence, his horse, faithful Roach, snorting clouds into the air. He'd been on the road for 3 days since Novigrad, following rumors that reached him through a trembling merchant at a crossroads inn. The man had spoken of Dunlow, a village near the marshes, where folk vanished and others were found changed, alive but hollow-eyed, unable to speak, as if something had reached inside their minds and stolen the words themselves. Such tales usually came twisted by fear and superstition, but there had been enough detail to stir Geralt's curiosity. He needed the coin, and more than that, he needed work. Idle hands made for uneasy thoughts, and the path did not forgive those who lingered too long in memory. By midday, the mist began to lift, revealing the outlines of cottages, smoke rising from crooked chimneys, and the distant ring of a blacksmith's hammer. Dunlow was small, a cluster of timber houses beside a sluggish stream. A weather-beaten shrine to Melitele stood near the entrance, its carvings cracked and worn by years of prayer. Geralt dismounted, leading Roach to the trough. Villagers watched him from behind shuttered windows, and those few who dared to walk the street did so with quick, nervous steps. Witchers were not often welcomed, but here, fear seemed to hang thicker than usual. He approached a man chopping wood by a gate. "I'm looking for your alderman," Geralt said. The man froze, axe halfway down. His eyes darted to Geralt's medallion, to the 2 swords strapped across his back. "You'd be the one they sent for, then." "Gods above." He wiped his hands on his tunic. "Alderman's name is Thomas. His house is up by the mill. He's expecting you, I think." Geralt nodded and followed the sound of the stream toward the mill. The water wheel turned slowly, creaking in protest. The alderman's house was larger than the rest, though still humble, its porch lined with drying herbs. Thomas met him at the door, a stout man with gray in his beard and worry in his eyes. "Witcher," he said, bowing his head slightly, "thank Melitele you came. It's bad here, real bad." Geralt stepped inside. The air smelled of candle wax and broth with an undercurrent of sickness. "Tell me everything," he said. Thomas sat heavily at the table. "Started 2 months back. First, old Marta went missing. Found her the next day by the river, alive but wrong. She stares, mutters nonsense, doesn't know her own name, then 2 more, then 4. Same thing, all pale, weak, no wounds, just empty, like their mind's been scooped clean." "Anyone die?" Geralt asked. Thomas hesitated. "Aye, last week, my cousin's boy. He went out after dusk. We found him in the morning, skin white as snow, eyes wide open. Doctor said his heart just stopped." Geralt leaned back, thinking. "You've kept the bodies?" The alderman shook his head. "Priest wouldn't allow it. Buried him proper, said the gods wouldn't stand for keeping cursed flesh." Of course, Geralt thought. Priests rarely helped matters. "This priest of yours, he from here?" "No," Thomas said. "Came this spring. Calls himself Father Corin. Says the curse came from sin. The Dunlows angered the eternal fire. He's got folk burning charms and hanging salt by their doors, but it does no good. More vanish every week." Geralt frowned. "And who told you it was a monster?" Thomas gestured toward the hearth. "An old woman. Lives by the marsh. Said it's the Night Mother come for revenge. Said she feeds on memories, leaves her victims hollow. I'd have ignored her, but..." He hesitated. "She knew things she couldn't. About the ones taken. Where do I find her?" "Her name's Marna. Shack by the southern bog. But Witcher," he leaned forward, "if you go there, be careful. Folks say she speaks with the dead." Geralt stood. "I've spoken with worse." He left the alderman's house as the sun sank low, painting the sky in bruised gold. The wind had a bite now, carrying with it the faint scent of decay from the marshes. He saddled Roach again, following the narrow path that wound southward through reeds and waterlogged ground. Crows called overhead. The air grew colder, the world quieter. When he finally reached Marna's hut, it leaned like a dying man against the roots of an old willow. Wisps of light flickered within, candles or something less earthly. Geralt knocked once. The door opened before he could touch it. Inside stood a woman wrapped in shawls, her eyes bright as coals in a hearth. "You've come too late, White Wolf," she rasped. "The Night Mother walks." Geralt's hand moved instinctively toward his silver sword. "Then tell me where to find her." Marna smiled, a thin, knowing smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You'll find her where she died, Witcher, beneath the chapel, where the fire burned but did not cleanse." The door creaked shut behind him as the first howl echoed through the swamp. It was not the cry of any beast he knew. High, mournful, and threaded was something human. Roach stamped nervously. Geralt's medallion began to tremble. Something was very wrong in Dunlow. Dawn came gray and heavy, a sluggish light crawling over the marshes and the roofs of Dunlow. Mist still clung to the ground, thick as breath from some sleeping beast. Geralt had spent the night outside the village, camping by the stream rather than risk a bed beneath an uneasy roof. Sleep had been shallow, filled with the whispering of reeds and the faint hum of his medallion. Now he stirred the embers of his small fire, poured water into his kettle, and watched it steam. The words of the marsh witch, Marna, echoed in his mind. Beneath the chapel, where the fire burned but did not cleanse. He knew that kind of riddle well enough. The villagers had mentioned Elira, the young widow burned for witchcraft. A tale like that always left scars. And if her spirit lingered, if the curse was born from betrayal and pain, then it was no ordinary haunting. When the tea was gone, he packed his gear, fastened his swords, and rode back toward Dunlow. The road was little more than mud and stones. Villagers were already stirring, some fetching water, others driving geese from the yards. A group of children stopped to stare at him until their mothers called them inside. Near the square, he found the chapel. It stood apart from the houses, whitewashed walls streaked with soot. The bell tower leaned slightly and the doors bore deep scratches, as if someone had clawed at them once in desperation. Father Corrin stood before the altar inside, a tall man in dark robes. The eternal fire burned low in its iron basin, giving the place a sickly glow. When the priest turned, his eyes were cold and sharp as flint. "So," he said, "a witcher. The alderman said you'd come." Geralt nodded. "You've been tending to the afflicted?" "I've been saving their souls," the priest replied stiffly. "What's left of them?" Geralt stepped closer, glancing at the row of benches where two pale figures sat staring into nothing. A woman hummed softly under her breath, a broken, tuneless melody. "They don't seem cured." "They cannot be cured," Corin said. "Only cleansed. Their minds are gone, taken by their own sin and by the evil that preys upon it. I warned this village, consorting with sorcery, with that woman, Elira. And now look." Geralt's eyes narrowed. Elira was accused of witchcraft. "She was a witch," the priest said sharply. "She killed her husband with her spells and cursed the village before she died. When we burned her, the fire barely touched her. It was a sign." "Or wet wood?" Geralt muttered. "Where is she buried?" Corin stiffened. "Outside the consecrated ground, South Ridge near the willows." "But it won't help you, Witcher? What walks now is not her, it's something else. Something older." Geralt turned to leave. "Old or not, I'll find it." The priest's voice followed him down the aisle. "You can't fight sin with silver, mutant. Only fire purifies." Outside, the morning mist began to lift. Geralt walked to the ridge where the ground sloped toward the marsh. The grass grew sparse there, the earth black and soft underfoot. A half-collapsed fence marked a forgotten patch of graves. Most were nameless, stones worn smooth by rain. He found her grave easily enough, a rough wooden cross charred at the edges. Someone had left a sprig of heather at its base. He crouched, tracing the soil with his gloved hand. The air here was colder, unnaturally still. His medallion vibrated faintly. He whispered an incantation, eyes narrowing as he sensed the residual aura, sorrow, rage, guilt, powerful emotions bound by violent death. Not merely a spirit's unrest, something had tethered Elira's essence, kept her from crossing over. He straightened, scanning the ground. Then he saw it. Thin tracks leading away from the grave toward the old chapel wall. Not footprints, exactly, more like the imprint of dragging cloth, or smoke given weight. When dusk fell, he returned to the chapel, this time through the back where the foundation had cracked. Beneath the crumbled stones, he found what he'd expected, a half-hidden door leading into the catacombs. The hinges were rusted, the handle slick with damp moss. Geralt lit a torch and stepped inside. The air was close and thick with the scent of mold. Rats scurried in the shadows. The corridor sloped downward, stone walls sweating with moisture. He passed alcoves filled with old bones, the remnants of forgotten burials. Then came the whisper, soft, feminine, echoing between the pillars. "Witcher." He drew his silver sword. In silence, the torchlight trembled. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a chamber, the remains of an altar still standing at its center, and there, hovering above the cracked floor, was a figure made of light and ash. Her hair floated like smoke, her eyes two hollow embers. "Elira," Geralt said quietly. The wraith turned, her voice a shiver in the air. "You should not have come. I've come to set you free." She drifted closer, and for a heartbeat he saw her as she had been, a young woman, gentle-featured, frightened. Then the vision flickered, replaced by hatred. "Free? I was burned alive while they prayed. They watched as the flames took me, and Father Corin said it was mercy." Geralt's grip tightened. "Something else keeps you here, something feeding on your grief." Her laugh was like breaking glass. "You think I am bound? Fool Witcher, I am the binding." The torchlight dimmed. The chamber filled with whispering voices. Shadows thickened, coalescing into shapes that crawled along the walls, figures without faces, clutching, reaching. Geralt's medallion vibrated violently. He drew a sign with his free hand, shouting, "Urden!" A ring of violet light flared beneath his feet, the sigil cutting through the illusions. The wraith screamed, a sound that shook dust from the ceiling. Then she vanished into the stone, leaving behind only the echo of her cry. When silence returned, Geralt crouched by the altar. Something glinted there, a fragment of bone carved with runes, blackened by fire, a focus, the tether. Someone had placed it here deliberately. He pocketed the fragment, snuffed his torch, and climbed back toward the surface. Night had fallen fully, the sky over Dunlow starless and heavy. As he emerged from the chapel ruins, a figure stepped from the shadows. Father Corrin, holding a lantern. "You meddle where you shouldn't, Witcher," the priest said coldly. "The dead should not be disturbed." Geralt held up the bone fragment. "Someone disturbed them long before I came." Corrin's eyes flickered to the charm, then away too quickly. "Destroy it," he said. "Burn it." Geralt studied him in silence. "You placed it there, didn't you?" The priest's expression hardened. "I do what must be done to protect souls from damnation, or to keep them under your control," Geralt said. "You bound her spirit." Corrin's hand tightened on his lantern. "You don't understand. Her power serves a purpose. Without it, Dunlow would fall to ruin." Geralt stepped forward, the silver blade gleaming faintly in the lantern light. "Then it's time to see what that purpose truly is." The wind rose suddenly, carrying with it a faint wail from the marshes, a cry neither living nor dead, and somewhere deep beneath the earth, something began to stir. The cry from the marsh faded into the night, swallowed by the cold wind sweeping through the graveyard. Geralt stood motionless, his sword drawn, eyes fixed on the priest before him. The man's lantern flickered, casting long, uncertain shadows across the chapel wall. "You've been feeding her power," Geralt said at last, his voice low and steady, "binding the wraith to this place so she can protect something or someone." Father Corrin's jaw clenched. "You know nothing of what's needed here, mutant. This village lives only because of what I've done. Without her, without the Night Mother, Dunlow would have perished long ago." Geralt stepped closer. "Explain." The priest looked toward the marsh, eyes glinting with a strange fervor. "This land is cursed. Long before your kind walked it, darkness slept beneath the bog. Old things, nameless, hateful, Elira's power holds it back. The day she's freed, it will rise again." "Convenient story," Geralt said dryly, "for a man who profits from fear." Corrin's voice cracked. "You think I wanted this? I begged the eternal fire for mercy, but there was none. When she died, the ground itself trembled. I used her remains to bind the curse, to save my flock." Geralt sheathed his sword halfway, though his eyes never left the priest. "You used necromancy, a priest of the eternal fire, dabbling in forbidden rites. That's not salvation, Corrin. That's hubris." Corrin's hand darted to his robes, drawing a dagger etched with runes. "You'll not ruin what I built." Before the blade could strike, Geralt moved. A flash of silver, the hiss of steel meeting steel. The dagger clattered to the ground, its edge broken. Geralt caught the priest by the collar and slammed him against the chapel wall. "Who taught you the spell?" he demanded. The priest's breath came ragged. "A wanderer, a scholar from Oxenford, said he could seal the evil if I provided the vessel. His eyes widened, terror dawning. "He said his name was Malgrim." Geralt froze. The name was known to him. a necromancer expelled from the academy, rumored to have trafficked in spirits and memory magic. If Malgrim was here, the curse of Dunlow was no mere haunting. Geralt released Corin roughly. Where is he now? In the catacombs, the priest gasped. Below the old crypts. He said he needed the girl's spirit to complete the seal. That was weeks ago. I haven't seen him since. Geralt turned toward the darkened chapel. Then that's where this ends. He descended once more into the depths, torch in one hand, silver blade in the other. The air grew colder with every step, thick with the stench of rot and mold. Somewhere ahead, faint chanting drifted through the stone corridors. The path opened into a vast chamber lit by pale blue fire. Symbols were carved into the floor, runes of binding and blood, and there, standing beside a circle of bones, was Malgrim. His robes were torn and filthy, his skin stretched thin as parchment. "You shouldn't be here, Witcher," the necromancer said without turning. "The ritual is fragile." Geralt's voice echoed across the chamber. "You've trapped a spirit. You're feeding off her power." Malgrim smiled faintly. "Feeding? No, I'm guiding it. Elira's pain sustains the barrier. It keeps the Ancient One asleep." "Lies," Geralt said. "You're using her to strengthen yourself." The necromancer turned then, eyes glowing faintly blue. "You see what you wish to see. The girl's death was a tragedy, yes, but now she serves a greater purpose. Dunlow thrives, the evil below remains bound. A small price for peace." Geralt advanced slowly, his sword glinting in the ghostly fire. "And when her strength fails, when the wraith consumes what's left of her soul," Malgrim's gaze darkened, "then we find another vessel." That was enough. Geralt lunged, the clash of steel and spell lighting the chamber. Malgrim shouted an incantation, sending a wave of force crashing against the Witcher's shield. Stone shattered. Geralt rolled aside, slashing through a tendril of conjured smoke that hissed like boiling water. The necromancer raised his staff, its crystal pulsing with sickly light. "You can't kill me, Witcher, not while she stands with me." A shriek tore through the chamber. From the circle rose Elira's wraith, her form burning brighter, her face contorted in fury. She struck at Geralt, claws flashing, each movement a blur of anguish. Geralt countered with another sign, the symbol of Quen flaring around him. Sparks flew as her blows met the protective field. "Elira," he shouted, "he's using you. Look at what he's done." The wraith hesitated, flickering like a candle in wind. For a heartbeat, her eyes cleared, and in them he saw the memory of a woman, not a monster. Malgrim's voice broke through, harsh and desperate. "No, remember their cruelty, the fire, the pain. Take your vengeance." Elira turned toward him. Her voice was no longer a wail, but a whisper. "You promised me peace. I gave you purpose," the necromancer roared. Her scream shattered the runes on the floor. The circle blazed white, then burst outward in a surge of spectral light. Malgrim's body was lifted from the ground, his flesh tearing apart as if the air itself rejected him. The smell of burning filled the crypt. When the light faded, only ash remained. Geralt lowered his sword, chest heaving. The wraith hovered before him, her form dim and trembling. "What will you do now?" he asked quietly. She looked toward the ceiling where faint daylight seeped through cracks in the stone. "I see it now, the truth. He bound me not to protect them, but to enslave me. Yet I still feel them, the people above. They fear what they do not understand. Perhaps I did too." Geralt nodded. "Then it's time to let go." She smiled faintly, a sad human smile. "Will you remember me, Witcher?" "Yes." Her form dissolved into light, scattering like dust caught in sunbeams. The chamber grew still. Only the whisper of air remained, soft and almost kind. When Geralt emerged from the crypt, dawn was breaking again. The fog had lifted from Dunlow. Villagers stood in the square, murmuring in awe as warmth returned to the air. Father Corin knelt near the chapel steps, his eyes hollow. "It's done," Geralt mounted Roach. "It's done. The curse is lifted, but you'll need more than prayers to cleanse what's left of this place." He turned his horse toward the road. The village lay quiet behind him, touched by the fragile light of morning. As he rode away, the first sunbeams struck the silver pommel of his sword, gleaming bright against the lingering shadows. And though the road ahead was long, Geralt of Rivia did not look back. The road from Dunlow wound eastward through low, frost-bitten fields. Winter had begun its slow advance, creeping across the land like a pale hand. Geralt rode in silence, the steady rhythm of Roach's hooves the only sound amid the sighing wind. Behind him lay the village, saved perhaps, though never whole again. Ahead stretched a new horizon, washed in the weak light of dawn. He had no destination in mind. Witchers seldom did. Work appeared where misfortune lingered, and misfortune was never scarce. Yet the encounter in Dunlow weighed on him. A priest turned necromancer, a girl's soul bound in torment, an ancient evil whispered beneath the earth. Too many such tales ended the same way. Innocence burned to ash while men of faith claimed righteousness. The path offered no time for brooding. By noon he reached a fork in the road and found an inn, a squat building with a sagging roof and a sign shaped like a stag's head. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth. Geralt dismounted, tethered Roach, and stepped inside. The common room was dim and smelled of ale and damp wool. A few travelers sat hunched over their mugs, and a bard plucked idly at a lute in the corner. The innkeep, a round man with a balding head, looked up as Geralt entered. "Looking for a room, Witcher?" he asked cautiously, eyeing the swords. "Food first," Geralt said. "An ale." The man nodded, vanishing into the kitchen. Geralt found a seat near the fire. The heat seeped slowly into his bones, easing the chill that had settled there since the crypt. He unbuckled his gauntlets and rubbed a scar on his wrist, an old wound from another wraith, another village, another time. The bard's tune shifted, soft and haunting. The melody spoke of lost loves and long roads, of monsters slain and those yet to come. Geralt's thoughts drifted until the sound of boots across the floor pulled him back. "White hair, 2 swords. You must be the Witcher folk whisper about," said a voice. He looked up. A man in a hunter's cloak stood before him, lean, sharp-eyed, his hands rough from bowstring and cold. "Depends on who's asking," Geralt replied. "Name's Vane," the hunter said. "From the hamlet of Brannock, 3 days east. We've trouble of our own, if you're looking for coin." Geralt's gaze sharpened. "What kind of trouble?" "Livestock torn apart. People missing near the forest edge. Tracks too large for wolves, too strange for men.
The alderman swears it's a werebeast. I don't believe in fairy tales, but I've seen the remains. It's real enough." Geralt nodded slowly. "Coin? 200 crowns, Vane said. "And a goat? You'll want bait." A faint smile touched Geralt's lips. Generous. The innkeep returned with bread, stew, and ale. Geralt ate in silence, the hunter waiting. When the bowl was empty, he stood. "All right. Lead the way." They rode east as dusk fell, the forest looming black against a bruised sky. The trees were ancient here, gnarled oaks and ash twisted like claws, their branches whispering secrets to the wind. Vane rode a few paces ahead, speaking little. Folk in Brannock say the creature howls only on moonless nights, the hunter said at last. Always near the old watchtower. They found what was left of a shepherd there last week. I wouldn't go near it after dark. You're going near it now, Geralt said. Aye, Vane replied grimly, but not alone this time. They reached the hamlet before midnight, a scattering of cottages around a frozen well. Few lights burned. The place was silent, heavy with dread. The alderman, a stooped man wrapped in a threadbare cloak, met them at the edge of the square. You came, he whispered, relief and fear warring in his voice. Thank the gods. It's been 3 nights since the last attack. We've posted guards, but it strikes too fast. Where? Geralt asked. Beyond the ridge, the alderman said, near the ruins of the tower. I can show you come morning. Geralt shook his head. It hunts at night. I'll see it then. The villagers exchanged uneasy glances. One woman crossed herself, another muttered a prayer. Geralt paid them no mind. He'd seen worse superstition. He followed Vane toward the forest edge where an old fieldstone fence marked the boundary between man's land and wild. They tethered their horses in the shadows and waited. The moon hid behind clouds, and the only sound was the sigh of wind through dead leaves. Hours passed in silence. Then came the noise, a low growl, deep and throaty, rolling from the darkness like distant thunder. Roach stamped nervously. Vane raised his crossbow, eyes wide. Geralt drew his silver sword, the blade whispering free of its scabbard. His medallion trembled. Stay behind me, he murmured. From the tree line emerged a shape, massive, hunched, its eyes glinting amber in the gloom. It moved with a predator's grace, claws sinking into the frost. For an instant the torchlight caught its form, a creature part wolf, part man, fur matted with blood. A lycanthrope. It circled them, growling low. Geralt's stance shifted, feet braced, blade angled. Don't shoot until I say, he warned. The beast lunged. Steel flashed. Geralt sidestepped, slashing across its flank. The creature howled, spinning, claws striking sparks from the sword. Its strength was monstrous, each blow like a hammer. Geralt ducked, rolled, struck again. Vane loosed a bolt. It struck the beast's shoulder, barely slowing it. The lycanthrope turned, snarling, and leapt toward the hunter. Geralt moved faster, driving his blade deep into its side. The monster shrieked and stumbled, black blood steaming on the snow. Then its eyes met Geralt's, and for a heartbeat he saw something human within them. Recognition, pain. Help me. It rasped, the words twisted by fangs. Geralt hesitated. That was a mistake. The creature lashed out, knocking him to the ground. His sword flew from his hand. He rolled as claws slashed the earth beside him. Vane reloaded, but the beast turned on him. The hunter cried out, and the creature's jaws closed on his arm. Blood sprayed, hot and dark. Geralt seized a dagger from his belt, drove it upward into the creature's throat. The lycanthrope convulsed, gurgled, and collapsed, shuddering until it lay still. The forest fell silent. Geralt rose, panting, retrieving his sword. The body before him shrank, bones twisting back into human form. A man lay there now, middle-aged, gaunt, eyes glassy with death. Vane clutched his bleeding arm. By the gods, that's our Reeve! Terran! Geralt wiped his blade on the grass.
Your reeve was cursed. The hunter's face went pale. He vanished a month ago. We thought he'd fled the taxes. But what could have done this to him? Geralt knelt beside the body, examining the skin. Faint runes scarred the man's chest, symbols of binding, familiar ones, the same kind of markings he'd seen in Dunlow. His expression darkened. This wasn't a natural curse, he said. Someone did this to him. Vane's eyes widened. The priest? We've a holy man come through from Oxenford. Said he was cleansing our land of spirits. Stayed in the Reeves' house. Geralt stood, sheathing his sword. Then your priest isn't holy. The hunter swayed on his feet, clutching his wound. What now? Geralt looked toward the dark outline of Brannock, the first lights flickering in the distance. Now, he said grimly, we hunt a man who thinks himself a god. And with that, he mounted Roach once more, the silver of his sword, catching what little moonlight broke through the clouds, silver against the darkness, gleaming like truth in a world steeped in lies. By dawn, the snows had deepened. The wind from the north carried with it the promise of a harsher winter, and the clouds overhead hung low and heavy, the color of steel. Geralt rode toward Brannock with Vane slumped behind him, the hunter's arm wrapped in a bloodied bandage torn from his own cloak. The path wound through frost-stiff meadows and clusters of birch that rattled in the wind like old bones. The village stirred uneasily as they arrived. Doors opened a crack. Pale faces peered out and vanished again. Geralt carried the hunter to the inn, a narrow building of timber and clay half buried in snow, and called for clean water and linen. The innkeep hesitated until the Witcher's golden eyes met his. Then the man scurried off, muttering prayers. Vane gritted his teeth as Geralt poured strong spirits over the wound. Hold still, the Witcher said. Silver didn't touch you, so you'll live. The curse won't pass this way. Thank the gods for that, the hunter gasped. Don't, Geralt said curtly. The gods had nothing to do with it. When the bleeding slowed, he tied the bandage firm and rose. The common room was empty but for an old woman tending the hearth. She crossed herself as he passed, whispering, Witcher, like it was both a warning and a plea. Outside, the morning light glimmered faintly off the snow. Geralt followed the narrow track to the Reeves' house, a larger structure near the center of Brannock, its thatched roof sagging beneath frost. A red ribbon of warding hung across the door. He cut it aside with one stroke of his knife and entered. The smell of incense and rot struck him at once. Candles burned low in every corner, their wax pooled thickly around small clay idols. A copper basin stood in the center of the room, half filled with dark water that rippled though no wind stirred it. Symbols had been carved into the walls, binding runes, crude but potent. He recognized them, Malgrim's mark. Geralt crouched, examining the basin. Beneath the surface gleamed something pale, a bone fragment shaped into a sigil. Another vessel, another chain for a trapped soul. He whispered, So you fled Dunlow after all. A sound came from the stair above, soft, deliberate steps. Geralt turned as a figure appeared in the gloom. A man cloaked in gray, his hair long and silvered, not with age but with unnatural energy. His eyes glowed faintly blue. Witcher, the man said, smiling thinly, we meet again, though perhaps you do not remember. You hunted me once, near Codwin. Geralt's hand went to his sword. Malgrim. The necromancer's smile widened. You destroyed my work in Dunlow. Do you know what you have undone? That spirit kept the darkness beneath the marsh sealed. Now it seeps into the world again. Geralt advanced a step. You twist every truth. You bound her soul for your own power. Power is the only thing that binds the world together, Malgrim said softly. The priests in Dunlow, the aldermen here, they all crave it. I merely give shape to their desires. He gestured to the basin. Taran, the Reeve, begged me to make him strong, to protect his people. I granted his wish. The curse was his doing as much as mine. Geralt's expression hardened. And now you'll pay for both. The necromancer raised his hand. The air shuddered. The water in the basin boiled black, and from its surface rose a shape, like mist and flame, a specter, half-formed, shrieking in rage. Geralt rolled aside as it struck, its claws raking stone. He drew his silver blade, its edge catching firelight. A quick sign, Irden, flared beneath him, slowing the creature's movement. The specter howled, its form unraveling at the edges. Geralt struck, slicing through the vaporous chest. The thing dissolved with a wail. Malgrim laughed, still the obedient sword. You don't see the truth, you never have. The world feeds on pain. I only harvest what already festers. He raised his staff. Lightning crackled along its runes. Geralt's medallion vibrated violently as he dove forward, the bolt searing the air where he had stood. He came up inside the necromancer's guard, swinging. Malgrim caught the blade on his staff, sparks flying. The scent of burned wood and metal filled the room. You can't kill me, the necromancer hissed. I've already crossed the veil. Then I'll send you the rest of the way. Geralt twisted, wrenching the staff aside, and drove his shoulder into Malgrim's chest. They crashed through the altar table, candles scattering. The necromancer snarled, chanting words that made the air ripple. Shadows thickened, reaching like tendrils. Geralt sliced through them, but more came, each one whispering in Alira's voice, in a dozen others, echoes of those the man had bound. For a heartbeat, the Witcher faltered. The faces of the dead swirled around him, pleading, accusing. He forced the vision aside, his training cutting through illusion. He drew the sign of Igni. Fire burst from his palm, catching the draperies alight. Smoke billowed, choking the room in heat and chaos. Malgrim stumbled back, his robes aflame. He struck at Geralt wildly, and steel met staff once more. Then Geralt's blade slid past the guard and sank deep into the necromancer's side. Malgrim gasped, eyes wide. Fool, you've doomed them all. Geralt wrenched the sword free. No, I freed them. The necromancer crumpled, blood black and steaming as it touched the floor. His body convulsed once, then stilled. The runes on the walls dimmed, their light fading. Outside, the wind howled, and the snow began to fall harder. Geralt looked down at the basin. The water had turned clear again. Beneath its surface lay a single human face. A young woman's, peaceful, her eyes closed as if in sleep. When he blinked, it was gone. He left the house as flames took hold. Villagers gathered in the square, murmuring in fear and awe as fire consumed the Reeve's dwelling. Vane appeared at his side, pale but standing. It's over? The hunter asked. For now, Geralt said. What was it truly? Ambition, Geralt answered, and the kind of magic that feeds on it. They watched the fire burn until the roof collapsed inward. When dawn broke fully, the sky was clear again, and the snow glowed faintly gold in the new light. Vane turned to him. Will it come back? Whatever he spoke of? This darkness beneath the land? Geralt swung into the saddle, Roach snorting against the cold. There's always darkness beneath the land. The trick is keeping it buried. He flicked the reins, and the horse began to move. leaving behind a trail of hoof prints, already softening beneath falling snow. The hunter called after him. "Where will you go?" Geralt did not answer. The path had no fixed end, no destination. There would always be another village, another curse, another shadow, in need of steel and silence. As he rode out into the white fields, the sound of the wind rose behind him, carrying with it faint echoes of the voices he had silenced. The medallion at his throat lay still once more. Far ahead, the road split beneath the pale sun. Geralt chose the northern track without thought, the path that promised little but distance. And as the last smoke from Brannock faded into the morning sky, he rode on, ever the hunter, ever alone, his silver sword gleaming cold against the encroaching dark. Snow whispered under Roach's hooves as Geralt rode northward, leaving behind the smoldering ruin of Brannock. The dawn that followed was bleak and colorless, its light stretching thin across a world stripped bare. Forests of frost-bitten birch stood like pale sentinels, and the rivers lay sealed beneath sheets of glassy ice. The Witcher's breath came in slow clouds, his eyes fixed upon the endless road. For 3 days he traveled in silence, stopping only to feed Roach and warm his hands over small, careful fires. He met no travelers. Even the birds had fled south. There was only the wind, whispering through the branches as though it carried the murmurs of the dead. On the 4th evening, when the sun was no more than a dull smear upon the horizon, Geralt came upon a caravan stranded by the roadside. 2 wagons lay half buried in snow, their wheels splintered, horses dead and stiff. Smoke rose from a hastily built campfire where a handful of figures huddled beneath tattered cloaks. One of them saw him approach and stood quickly, drawing a sword that gleamed faintly in the firelight. "Stay where you are," the man called. Geralt halted Roach and raised a gloved hand. "Easy. I've no quarrel." The man hesitated, lowering his blade a fraction. "A witcher?" he said, his tone a mix of relief and suspicion. Geralt nodded. "You're a long way from safety." "We were bound for a lander," the man said. "Merchants out of Vizima. The bridge ahead gave out under the snow. Then," he gestured toward one of the wagons, "something took our horses in the night." Geralt dismounted, his medallion tingling faintly. He moved closer to the wagon, kneeling beside the carcass of a mare. The wounds were ragged, but not from teeth or claws. The flesh was scored as if flayed by something sharp and deliberate. "Not wolves," he said. A woman near the fire shivered. "It came at dusk," she whispered. "A shadow with wings. We heard it first, the sound of claws scraping stone. It took the horses before we could light the torches." Geralt straightened. "You'll stay here tonight?" "We've little choice," the merchant said. "The bridge to Elander's impassable, and the road behind us is worse." Geralt looked toward the dark line of forest to the west. "Then keep your fire burning and stay close to it. I'll take the first watch." The merchant hesitated, then nodded. "If you can drive it off, Witcher, there'll be coin for you. Not much, but enough for your trouble." Geralt gave a brief nod. "I'll collect after." Night came quickly, and with it a wind that seemed to gnaw at the world itself. The Witcher stood apart from the fire, his cloak drawn tight, eyes fixed on the tree line. Hours passed in silence, the snow falling heavier, muffling every sound. Then faint and distant came a scraping, metal against stone. Geralt turned, his hand finding the hilt of his silver sword. His medallion trembled, vibrating so sharply he could feel it through the leather of his jerkin. A dark shape moved between the trees. The firelight caught a flash of wing, a shimmer of wet scales. The creature that stepped into the open was no mere beast. It walked upright, its body lean and sinewed, its face sharp as a skull, wings like a bat's folded against its back, glistening with frost. Its eyes burned red. "An Akimara," Geralt muttered. The creature hissed, showing teeth long and needle-like. It moved fast, too fast for the merchants to even scream. Geralt rolled aside as it lunged, claws slicing through the air where he had stood. He struck low, his blade cutting across its leg. Black blood steamed upon the snow. The monster shrieked, spinning toward him, wings snapping open with a sound like tearing cloth. Geralt drew the sign of Quen, the faint glow of the shield flickering as the creature's claws struck. Sparks flew. He countered with Igni, a burst of fire that caught the Ekimara's shoulder, sending it staggering back with a howl. The stench of burned flesh filled the air. The Witcher advanced, feinting left, then driving his blade deep beneath its ribs. The beast convulsed, shrieking, and lashed out one last time, claws catching his arm. Pain flared hot, but Geralt didn't falter. He wrenched the blade free and swung once more, severing its head in a clean, brutal arc. For a moment there was only the sound of the wind and the hiss of melting snow, then silence. The merchants stared wide-eyed as Geralt wiped his sword clean and sheathed it. The woman crossed herself. "Melidle, protect us," she whispered. "Keep your prayers," Geralt said, inspecting his wound. "What you need is a bridge that won't crumble." He took his payment at dawn, a handful of crowns and a strip of dried meat, and left them behind. The path called, as it always did, and the Witcher had never been one to linger. By midday he reached the ruins of the broken bridge. Ice clogged the river below, the current sluggish and gray. He found a narrow ford where the water ran shallow and crossed there, Roach moving slow and sure. Beyond lay a stretch of moorland, and beyond that a scatter of cottages rising from the fog. A wooden sign marked the place, Vergen Hollow. He had heard of it once, miners' country, half abandoned after the veins ran dry. Now it looked a little better than a graveyard, with only a few thin columns of smoke rising from crooked chimneys. Geralt rode through the main track, his eyes scanning the shadows between the houses. The people who remained watched from behind shutters. At the end of the street stood a forge, its fire still burning. A blacksmith worked there, a dwarf, broad and bearded, his hammer ringing against the anvil. He looked up as Geralt approached. "You've the look of a man who knows his steel," the dwarf said. "You come for repairs or for work?" "Depends on the pay," Geralt replied. The dwarf snorted. "You'll find neither much nor fair in Vergen Hollow. But if it's trouble you're after, we've got that aplenty." He wiped his hands on a rag and leaned close. "Folk have been vanishing in the mines. No blood, no signs of struggle, just gone. Some say the tunnels whisper now, call folk by name." Geralt frowned. "Whispers, not screams?" "Aye. Sweet as a lover's voice, so they say." Then silence. The Witcher's hand brushed the hilt of his sword. "Where's the entrance?" The dwarf pointed toward the hill beyond the village, where the earth yawned open in a black scar. "Up there, but mind yourself, Witcher. Those mines were carved deep, and what's deep remembers." Geralt nodded once. "I'll remember too." He turned toward the hill, the cold air biting sharper now, the sky dimming once more. As he neared the mouth of the mine, his medallion stirred faintly, first a tremor, then a steady hum. Something waited below, and it was not human. Geralt drew his sword, the silver gleaming pale in the dying light. The first step into the darkness sounded loud as thunder, and then the shadows swallowed him whole. The air inside the mine was thick, cold, and heavy with the scent of iron and old dust. Geralt descended the narrow shaft slowly, each step measured, the torch in his left hand casting long, trembling shadows along the tunnel walls. The silence here was unnatural, not merely the stillness of abandoned places, but something watchful, listening. Even Roach, tethered far above, had stamped and snorted uneasily as he'd left her. The Witcher's medallion trembled faintly against his chest, pulsing like a heartbeat. Whatever haunted these tunnels was no phantom rumor. It was real and close. He reached a fork in the path where the old mining rails split. To the left, the tunnel sloped deeper, the wood beams blackened by moisture. To the right, a faint draft stirred, carrying with it the scent of ash and decay. He chose the right-hand path, his boots whispering against the gravel. After several turns, the walls widened into a chamber, its roof lost to darkness. Broken tools and rusted carts lay strewn across the ground. On one wall, a crude shrine had been built from ore stones, symbols scratched deep into them. Geralt crouched, studying the carvings. They weren't dwarven runes. They were older, rougher. Human hands had made them, but guided by something that remembered ancient power. A sound drifted from the shadows beyond the shrine, a whisper, soft and low, just beyond understanding. The Witcher froze, listening. The words slid through the air like breath. "Geralt, come!" He straightened, sword half drawn. "Show yourself." Only the echo answered. He took another step, torch held high, its light glancing off damp stone. Something moved then, quick, sinuous, a flicker of pale flesh vanishing behind a rock fall. Geralt circled slowly, senses sharpening, eyes narrowing to slits in the dim glow. When the thing struck, it came from above. A blur of motion, claws raking the air where his head had been. Geralt rolled aside, the torch falling, sputtering on the ground. In its fleeting light, he saw the creature fully, long and thin, its body twisted like rope, its skin translucent, veins black as ink running beneath. Its eyes glowed faintly white, and its mouth was too wide, filled with needle teeth. A mournling, he thought, a creature born from grief twisted by magic. They fed on voices, luring prey with whispers of loved ones lost. The mournling hissed, circling him, its movements unnervingly fluid. Geralt drew the sign of Írden, the glyph blazing purple across the dirt. The creature darted forward and slowed, caught in the field's glow. He slashed once, silver flashing. The blade bit deep, drawing a scream that shook dust from the beams above. The mournling recoiled, its blood black and smoking. Yet even wounded, it smiled, voice echoing in his mind now. "You think me alone, Witcher? Fool, I am but the echo." From the tunnels behind him came more whispers, dozens of them. Geralt tightened his grip. Wonderful. They came from every direction, shapes slipping from cracks and crevices, crawling along the walls and ceiling, their pale bodies glimmering in the torchlight. He swung wide, cleaving through one, then another, the air filled with their shrieks. Each cut left trails of dark smoke that burned his eyes. He reached for Igni, casting a wave of fire that roared down the tunnel. The flames swallowed the front ranks, sending the rest skittering back into the dark. The mine groaned as heat met cold stone. Cracks spread through the ceiling, and pebbles rained down. Geralt backed toward the exit, breath steady, movements precise. The creatures hissed from the shadows, but none dared approach the dying firelight. He reached a narrow ledge near the upper shaft when a different sound rose behind the whispers, a deeper tone, rhythmic, almost like a chant. It came from below, where the tunnels merged into blackness. "Not finished yet, are we?" he murmured. He retrieved the torch and descended again. The air grew colder, the walls slick with condensation. The chanting grew louder, words now clear and old, elder speech, twisted through human tongues. When the tunnel opened into a cavern, Geralt paused at its mouth. A circle of candles burned on the floor below, their light flickering across carvings etched deep into the rock. Within the circle knelt 3 figures, men by shape, though their eyes were gone and their mouths moved in perfect unison. Before them something writhed, a pool of darkness, liquid yet alive. The Witcher's medallion pulsed violently. Whatever that darkness was, it wasn't natural. Geralt stepped forward, sword drawn. "Enough," he said, voice cutting through the chant. The 3 stopped. One turned toward him, face hollow as a skull. "You cannot end it," the man croaked. "It was promised. The vein must open." "Vein? The lifeblood beneath the world," said another, smiling through bloodied teeth. "Malgrim failed, but we endure. He bound spirits to the surface. We dig to the source." Geralt's expression hardened. "Your miners turned cultists." "Servants," the third whispered, "chosen." The pool behind them stirred, swelling upward into form, an amorphous mass that reflected no light, its edges writhing as if made of smoke and oil. A stench like burning metal filled the air. The candles flickered, their flames bending toward it as if drawn by breath. Geralt had seen many things in his years on the path, but this was old. Older than the conjunction, older than any monster shaped by chaos. It pulsed with something primal, a hunger that was not merely for flesh, but for being itself. The men screamed as tendrils reached from the mass, piercing them. Their bodies convulsed, skin turning black as they crumbled into dust. The creature absorbed their essence, growing, stretching toward Geralt. He drew the sign of Quen just as it struck. The impact threw him backward, the shield cracking like glass. He hit the ground hard, rolled, and came up swinging. His blade met resistance, striking not flesh, but something denser, colder. "Yrden won't hold it," he muttered. "Need fire." He cast Igni again, pouring all his strength into the sign. Flames erupted, bathing the cavern in searing light. The creature shrieked, retreating, its form unraveling. The walls themselves seemed to moan as the heat spread. Geralt pressed forward, cutting through a tendril, then another. The silver blade burned white hot, cleaving through the darkness. With a final roar, the creature collapsed inward, its mass shrinking to nothing but ash and soot. Silence fell. Only the drip of water from the ceiling remained. Geralt stood among the remnants, chest rising and falling. He looked to the place where the pool had been, and saw faintly a single rune glowing upon the stone, a mark of containment. Someone had sealed this thing here once. The miners had broken it open. He sheathed his sword slowly. And people wonder why dwarves don't trust men with deep holes. By the time he climbed from the mine, dawn was breaking once more, pale light creeping across the hills. The dwarf blacksmith waited near the entrance, wrapped in a heavy cloak, his expression grim. "Well?" he asked. "Your mine's clean," Geralt said, "but you'd best seal it. Whatever was buried there, men shouldn't dig so deep again." The dwarf nodded heavily. "I'll see to it, and the others?" They won't be coming back." The dwarf crossed his arms. "Aye. None of us ever really do we?" Geralt said nothing. He mounted Roach, the wind carrying with it the faint smell of soot from the mines, and turned once more toward the open road. Another village freed, another shadow banished. Yet the silence that followed was never peace, only the breath before the next storm. As Roach's hooves carried him north, the snow began to fall again. Soft, endless, and white as the ghosts of all he had left behind. The storm had begun at dusk, rolling down from the Mahakam foothills like a living thing. Snow came thick and fast, driven by a wind that howled through the trees and tore at cloaks and reins. Geralt pressed onward through the blinding white, his head bowed, Roach snorting clouds of steam as her hooves crunched through the drifts. The road had long since vanished beneath the storm, but the Witcher had long ago learned that the path was not marked by stones or signs. It was a thing felt in the blood, a direction pulled from instinct rather than sight. He found shelter as night fell, a half-collapsed watchtower standing crooked upon a hill, its roof cracked but walls still sound. Within, the air was thick with dust and the faint musk of old decay. He tethered Roach in the lee of the stones, gathered what dry timber he could, and kindled a fire. The flames climbed slowly, filling the ruin with orange light. Geralt sat close to the warmth, cleaning his sword with a cloth darkened by soot and blood. The medallion on his chest lay still now, the hum of danger quieted. Outside, the wind moaned like some vast creature circling its prey. When the kettle had boiled, he poured the steaming water over dried herbs from his satchel and drank in silence. The brew was bitter, but steadying. He had thought to sleep, but as the fire sank lower, a sound stirred beyond the tower wall, a faint rhythm like bells beneath the wind. Geralt stilled. Bells meant trade caravans or temples, but there were neither in these wild hills. He rose, drawing his cloak tight, and stepped into the storm. Snow swirled thick as smoke, hiding the moon. Yet through it he saw a flicker of light to the east, a lantern swinging, vanishing, then reappearing farther off. He moved toward it. Each step sank deep. The light drew him down into a shallow hollow where the snow thinned and the air carried a scent that did not belong to winter: spice, smoke, and faintly decay. The lantern hung from a post beside a wagon, but the wagon was like none he had seen in years. Its sides were carved with curling patterns of ivy and suns, and from its roof hung strings of tiny silver chimes. He brushed snow from its wheel and saw old paint beneath, crimson and gold, a traveling troop's wagon, a mummer's cart. The door was ajar. Geralt's hand went to his sword. He pushed it open slowly, the hinges creaking. Inside, the air was stale and heavy. Costumes hung from hooks, velvet, lace, leather masks with painted smiles. Instruments lay scattered on the floor, and in the corner, half buried under a blanket, lay a man. The Witcher knelt, fingers seeking a pulse. Faint, but there. The man's face was gaunt, pale with frostbite. His lips cracked. Geralt poured a few drops of elixir between them. The man stirred with a groan. "Who are you?" Geralt asked quietly. The man's eyes fluttered open, gray, clouded with confusion. The troop," he rasped. "We came from Elender. The snow caught us. But the others, they followed the bells. Thought it was the lady calling." Geralt frowned. "The lady?" The man nodded weakly. "A woman's voice, singing. Sweet as honey. Said she would lead us to warmth." He coughed, trembling. "They went into the woods. Never came back. Sirens or something close." Geralt wrapped his cloak around the man and dragged the wagon door shut against the wind. "Stay awake if you can," he said. "I'll find your friends." He stepped once more into the storm, the snow already filling his tracks. The singing began faintly then, drifting through the gale, a melody soft and lilting, the kind meant to draw sailors to their deaths. It wound around the trees, echoing across the hills. Geralt followed it. The song led him through a grove where the snow had melted strangely, the ground wet and black. Shapes lay half buried there, bodies frozen mid-step, faces turned upward as if listening. Their skin was pale blue, their eyes glazed and open. At the grove's center stood a pool, unfrozen despite the cold, its surface smooth as glass. The song rose from it clearer now. Beneath the water, something moved, a figure shifting just below the surface. Geralt drew his silver sword, muttering a curse. "You'd best stay quiet, whatever you are." The water rippled, and she rose, tall and pale, her hair black as ink, her eyes deep and luminous. Her beauty was wrong, almost painful, the kind that bent the mind. When she smiled, it was like watching ice crack. "Witcher," she said, her voice the echo of 100 whispers, "you hunt the lost again." "What are you?" "Once they called me Melusine. Once I sang for kings. Now I sing for the dead." He took a slow step backward. "You lured those mummers here." "I offered them what all mortals seek," she replied, tilting her head. "Rest, warmth, an end to hunger. They're frozen corpses." She laughed softly. "The body is nothing. I gave them peace." Geralt's blade gleamed as he raised it. "Peace doesn't bleed the living dry." Melusine's expression turned sorrowful. "You think me cruel, White Wolf, but hunger is not cruelty, it is truth." The pool erupted. She came at him, water streaming from her body like liquid glass. He met her with steel, slashing once, twice, each strike sparking against her unnatural flesh. She moved faster than most men could see, her claws slicing air. He dodged, rolling aside, the snow steaming where her touch fell. She sang as she fought, each note striking his mind like a hammer. The air shimmered, vision blurring. He bit down hard on his tongue, tasted blood, and the haze cleared. Geralt thrust upward, the sword piercing her side. She screamed, a sound like breaking ice, and staggered back. You are empty," she hissed. "No song for you. Only silence." "Silence suits me." He drew the sign of Igni, flames roaring across her form. The snow hissed and melted, the air filling with steam and the scent of burning lilies. When the fire dimmed, only the pool remained, still, dark, and empty. The song had ended. Geralt stood for a long moment, breathing hard, then turned back toward the wagon. The storm had begun to ease, the wind falling to a low murmur. Inside, the man still breathed, barely. When Geralt entered, he opened his eyes once more. "The singing stopped," he whispered. "She's gone, isn't she?" "She's gone." The man smiled faintly. "Then I'll rest." He exhaled softly and did not breathe again. Geralt watched the flame of the lantern flicker over the still face, then closed the man's eyes. Outside, the snow had lightened to a slow, steady fall. He buried the body beside the wagon at dawn, marking the grave with a stone and one of the silver chimes. When he mounted Roach, the world was pale and clean again, the storm's fury forgotten. He rode north, through valleys washed in white, the horizon stretching endlessly ahead. The wind at his back carried no song now, only silence. and in that silence, the Witcher found the faintest trace of peace. But like all things on the path, it would not last. The next days were marked by stillness. The storm had spent its wrath, leaving behind a land drowned in white and silence. Geralt rode through the frost-bitten valleys without company, save for the rhythmic breath of roach and the creak of leather beneath him. The world had folded in upon itself, muffled and small, as if winter sought to swallow every living thing. He followed the trade road north until he reached a fork lined with bare poplars. There, an old signpost leaned askew, its carvings half buried in snow. One arm pointed toward Cairdees, the other toward Bramar Hollow. He frowned. Bramar Hollow was a name seldom spoken, even among witchers. He remembered it from old hunters' tales of a village that once stood near the cliffs of the Yaruga, abandoned after something foul took root beneath its soil. Roach stamped the ground impatiently. Geralt looked at the sky. The clouds were low, pregnant with more snow. He sighed and turned toward Bramar Hollow. There would be shelter there, if not peace. By twilight he saw the rooftops, dark shapes half buried in drifts, the remains of houses leaning like broken teeth. Smoke rose from one chimney only, curling thinly into the cold air. A lonely flame. The rest of the village lay silent, as though even ghosts had grown weary of haunting it. Geralt dismounted before the tavern, or what was left of one. Its door creaked on rusted hinges as he entered. Inside, the air smelled of soot and tallow. A fire burned low in the hearth, and behind the counter stood an old woman, her face a map of creases and sorrow. "You've come far to reach a place forgotten," she said without greeting. "I go where work calls," Geralt replied, "and sometimes where the road insists." The woman's gaze lingered on his medallion. "You'll find little coin here, Witcher. Only bones and old grief." "Bones tell stories," he said, "and grief has a way of calling monsters." Her eyes flickered toward the shuttered window. "Aye, that it does. There's something stirring in the hollow again. Lights by night, like lanterns moving beneath the ground. And voices, sweet ones, calling for help. The young fool who went to follow them 2 nights past hasn't come back." "Voices again," Geralt murmured. "Always voices." The woman poured him a mug of mead and pushed it across the counter. "He was the miller's son, barely 16. His mother's gone mad with worry. Says it's the spirits of the old well calling." Geralt drank the mead sharp and warm. "Where's the well?" "Past the square, beneath the old oak." He rose, setting the mug aside. "I'll look into it." Outside, the air had deepened to blue-black, the snow glowing faintly in the moonlight. The wind carried a low hum, half song, half mourning. He followed it past the silent houses to the square, where the great oak stood, its branches skeletal against the sky. Beneath it gaped a stone well rimmed with frost. He knelt beside it, running a gloved hand along the edge. The stones were damp and cold, and faint wisps of steam rose from within. The medallion stirred. Magic, old and foul. A faint whisper drifted upward. "Help me." Geralt leaned closer. "Name yourself." Silence. Then again, "Help me, please." The voice was soft, childlike, trembling with despair. He tied a rope to the oak's root, fixed it to his belt, and descended into the dark. The air grew warmer as he went down, the walls slick with moss. At the bottom, his boots met shallow water. He lit a torch. The tunnel that stretched before him had once been a drain, but the stones were blackened, veins of crystal running through them, unnatural veins pulsing faintly, like the flesh of some buried beast. The whisper came again, this time from ahead. He followed it through twisting passages until he reached a cavern lit by the same ghostly glow that shimmered in the walls. In its center lay a figure, a boy, pale, unmoving, eyes open. His lips moved soundlessly. Geralt crouched beside him. The boy's chest still rose and fell, but faintly. He drew a small phial from his belt and uncorked it, waving it before the boy's face. The Witcher's medallion shuddered violently. A curse. Not a possession, but something worse. A feeding. He heard the whisper again, but this time it came from everywhere at once. "You cannot take him," it said, a chorus of voices. "He is chosen." Geralt rose, torch in one hand, sword in the other. "Show yourself." The cavern stirred. Shadows slid along the walls, gathering in the air like smoke drawn to a flame. They coalesced into the form of a woman, tall, regal, her hair flowing like ink, her eyes black pits. Her presence filled the air with a weight that pressed upon the lungs. "I am the mother below," she said. "This place is mine. These people forget their debts." Geralt's grip tightened. Another spirit bound to men's folly. Her laugh was low and terrible. Bound? No, Witcher. Worshipped. I kept their wells full, their crops green. They turned away. Now they feed me again, one by one. All things return to the earth. She reached toward the boy. Her hand passed through him, drawing threads of light from his chest. He shuddered, gasping. Geralt stepped between them. "You'll take no more." The spirit's eyes blazed. "You would defy the soil itself?" He lifted the silver sword, the runes along its edge, catching the torchlight. "Done it before." The creature shrieked, the sound shaking the stones. The walls bled light as she struck, claws of shadow raking through the air. Geralt countered with Írden, the glyph flaring bright. The spirit's form wavered, her voice twisting into rage. "You are nothing but ash and blood. You cannot stop the root." Geralt lunged, slicing through her torso. The blade passed through like smoke, yet the cry that followed was real, deep, and raw. He drew Igni with his free hand, casting fire across her form. The cavern erupted in blinding light. When the flames dimmed, the mother below was gone. Only the faint echo of her laughter remained, drifting like mist. The boy lay still. Geralt checked his pulse. Alive, weak, but alive. He lifted him carefully, slinging him over one shoulder, and climbed back to the surface. The first light of dawn touched the snow when he emerged. The old woman waited at the square's edge, her shawl drawn tight. When she saw the boy, she wept. "Is it done?" she asked. "For now," Geralt said, "but don't dig near that well again. Some things stay buried for a reason." She nodded, clutching the boy to her chest. "You'll have no coin from us, Witcher, but you have our thanks." He shook his head. "Keep both. Just fill the well with stone." By the time the sun climbed above the horizon, Geralt was already gone, the village shrinking behind him. The snow glittered under the morning light, untouched and pure once more. Yet as he rode north, he could still hear faintly in the wind the echo of the mother's voice, whispering like roots twisting through the dark. All things return to the earth. Geralt did not answer. He only rode faster, his silver sword gleaming cold against his back, a sliver of defiance against the endless hungry white. Dawn crept cold and thin across the plains. A pale sun rose behind veils of mist, and frost lay thick upon every blade of grass. Geralt rode in silence, his cloak drawn close, the sound of roaches' hooves muffled in the brittle snow.
The road wound northward toward Temeria's border, where rumors spoke of war again, skirmishes, disappearances, soldiers vanishing in the night. The kind of work that drew witchers like flies to carrion. He had not slept well since Braemar Hollow. The whispers of the mother below clung to his dreams, curling through his thoughts like roots. All things returned to the earth. The words lingered, an echo that would not fade, but there was no time for sleep nor space for reflection. The path allowed neither. By midday he came upon a camp beside the frozen river. 6 men, a fire burning low, their armor dull beneath a film of frost. They bore Temerian colors, though the crest was torn from most cloaks. Mercenaries, then, or deserters? Their leader, a broad man with a scar down one cheek, rose as Geralt approached. "Easy," Geralt said, raising a hand. "I'm passing through." The man eyed the swords across his back. "Passing through with a pair of blades like those? Either you're a sellsword or a witcher." "Witch? Witcher?" The man's stance eased a fraction. "Then you'll want to hear this. We've lost 3 men in 2 nights, not to war, not to bandits. One moment they were standing watch, the next, gone. Left only tracks that stop cold in the snow." Geralt dismounted, curiosity sharpening his tone. "Where?" "Other side of the river," the man said, "near the ruins of an old fortress. Locals call it Blackbriar Keep. We were using it for shelter until the disappearances began." "Show me," Geralt said. The mercenary hesitated. "We can't pay much." "I didn't ask for coin." They crossed the river on a crust of ice, the wind biting at their faces. Beyond lay the keep, half-collapsed towers rising like broken fangs, the walls lost beneath ivy and frost. The gate hung open, its hinges long rusted. Inside silence ruled. The courtyard was littered with the remains of old battles, shattered helms, bones buried in snow. A single tree grew in the center, gnarled and black, its roots clutching at the stones like talons. Geralt's medallion began to hum, faint but insistent. "Where did you last see your men?" "Up by the hall," the scarred man said, pointing toward a doorway yawning dark at the far end. "They were on watch there." Geralt nodded. "Stay here." He moved toward the hall, every sense attuned. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint tang of old death. The fire pits were long cold, but the floor, he knelt, brushing away snow, was marked by symbols carved deep into the stone, runes of binding, half erased. A trap, then, or a seal. Something had been held here once, and someone or something had broken it. He rose, scanning the shadows. "Come out," he said quietly. A low voice answered, echoing through the ruined hall. "Witcher." It came from above. Geralt turned as a figure stepped into view on the balcony. A tall man in a tattered cloak, his hair white as bone. In his hand he held a staff carved from dark wood, its head crowned with a shard of crystal that pulsed faintly red. "I know that look," Geralt said. "Another of Malgrim's disciples." The man smiled thinly. "Disciple? No, successor. The master's fall left his work unfinished. I intend to complete it. By murdering deserters? By feeding the vain?" the man said softly. "You felt it, haven't you? The stirring beneath the soil. It calls to us. It called to Malgrim, to Elira, to all who touch true power. You thought you ended it in Dunlow? Fool, you only loosen the chains?" Geralt drew his sword, the sound cutting through the still air. "Then I'll bind it again, with your bones, if need be." The sorcerer's eyes glowed crimson. "We'll see whose strength the earth favors." The floor trembled.
Cracks split the stone, and from them rose shapes of shadow, human once but twisted, eyeless, their flesh gray as ash. The lost soldiers, their armor clattered as they turned toward him, jaws opening in silent screams. Geralt struck first, his blade flashing silver in the dim light. The nearest corpse fell in 2 clean pieces, smoke hissing from the wound. Another lunged. He ducked, rolling to one knee, slashing upward through its ribs, but for each that fell, 2 more rose. "Sign of Igni," he muttered. Fire burst from his palm, engulfing the nearest wraiths. They shrieked, flailing, crumbling into ash. Still the sorcerer's laughter echoed overhead. "You cannot burn the dark, Witcher." Geralt ignored him, tracing the sign of Yrden across the floor. The glyph flared violet, its circle expanding to trap the shades. Their movements slowed, their forms shuddering. He leapt through the haze, slicing down 2 more before turning his gaze to the balcony. The sorcerer raised his staff again, the crystal now blazing. Energy arced through the air, striking the stone beside Geralt, shattering it into shards. He rolled behind a pillar, breath hissing through his teeth. The runes on the floor pulsed, the cracks widening. Beneath them something moved. A low, rumbling growl rolled through the keep, shaking dust from the rafters. "Too late," the sorcerer whispered. "It wakes." Geralt sprang forward, throwing a knife. The blade struck true, burying itself in the man's shoulder. The sorcerer staggered, the staff clattering from his grip. The glow faded, and the ground stilled. Geralt climbed the crumbling stairs 2 at a time. The man crawled backward, clutching his wound. "Mercy," he gasped. "You don't understand. If I die, the vein will—" Geralt silenced him with one clean strike. The sword slid free, blood steaming in the cold air. The crystal from the staff rolled across the floor, humming softly. He picked it up, feeling its warmth through the glove. It thrummed like a living heart. Below, the mercenaries called out, their voices faint. Geralt walked to the balcony and looked down. "It's done," he said. "Bury your dead. Burn the rest." The scarred man nodded. "And the keep?" Geralt dropped the crystal onto the stones and crushed it beneath his boot. The hum ceased. "Seal it. Let the snow have it." He left before nightfall, the sound of shovels echoing behind him as the mercenaries set to their grim task. The sun bled into the horizon, painting the snow red. As he rode, Geralt glanced once over his shoulder. The keep stood silent again, its towers black against the fading light. Yet for a moment, just a breath, he thought he saw movement in the highest window, a shadow watching. Then it was gone. He turned back to the road, the wind cold against his face. The world was quiet once more, but he knew that beneath that quiet, things stirred. Always. The path stretched on, endless as the snows, and Geralt of Rivia rode toward it, silver against the darkness, as the first stars pierced the winter sky. The road bent through pine and frozen stream, winding north where the land grew harsher and more lonesome. Geralt rode for 3 days, without meeting another soul. Frost hung from every branch like glass daggers, and when the wind rose, it made the forest sigh like something living. He had seen such winters before, long, cruel seasons that silenced the world and made men half mad with hunger and dark thoughts. The path was quiet, but quiet never lasted. At dusk on the 3rd day, he came upon a wayside chapel. The roof sagged, and the altar stones were cracked, but the fire still burned in a pit before the door.
A single figure knelt there, wrapped in furs, his hands lifted toward the flame. When Geralt approached, the man turned, revealing a weather-worn face and a priest's medallion hanging from his neck. "Traveler," the priest said, "or hunter?" "Both," Geralt answered. "The fire's warm. Mind if I share it?" The man gestured for him to sit. "All warmth is borrowed from the world, not owned. Take what you need." Geralt crouched by the flames, unbuckled his gloves, and held out his hands. "You're far from any village." "I go where the gods have gone silent," the priest said, "and they've been silent long in these woods." Geralt looked around. The air smelled faintly of resin and something older, like earth freshly turned. "You're burying something?" The priest nodded toward the chapel. "Someone, the villagers of Arvin, sent for me, a plague of sorts, but not of flesh. Men wander into the trees and return changed, empty, their eyes blank as snow. Some don't return at all. I went to pray over the dead, only the dead weren't still." "Wraiths?" "Not quite. The bodies wake at night, but they do not speak. They walk east toward the valley. I followed once. There's a ruin there, an abbey long abandoned. I heard music inside, though none live there." Geralt's medallion pulsed faintly. "Music," he said. "What kind?" "A harp," the priest whispered. "Beautiful, terrible." Geralt rose. "Where's this abbey?" "Half a day's ride. But be warned, Witcher. Whatever calls them, it's no spirit of mercy." "Few are." He left at first light, the priest's blessing fading behind him. The air grew colder as he descended into the valley. Mist lay thick along the ground, curling like breath. The abbey came into view by noon, a cluster of ruins upon a ridge, its spire broken, its bells long silent. Yet faintly through the mist, he heard it, the trembling notes of a harp, soft as falling snow. He dismounted, leaving Roach at the edge of the wood, and climbed the stone steps. The doors of the abbey hung ajar, their carvings eaten by age. Inside, shafts of gray light fell through the roof, illuminating rows of statues draped in ivy. The music grew clearer. It came from the chancel beyond. Geralt drew his sword, boots echoing softly on the stone. The air shimmered faintly. His medallion vibrated like a plucked string. At the far end stood a woman, cloaked in white, her hair gold as ripe wheat. She sat before a harp of bone, fingers moving with slow grace. Around her lay a circle of bodies, dozens dressed in rags, their faces peaceful, as if asleep. Geralt stopped several paces away. "That's a fine tune," he said. The woman turned. Her eyes were pale, almost colorless, and when she smiled, it was both kind and cold. "You hear it," she said. "Most only sleep. I've an ear for curses." She rose, the harp strings still vibrating behind her. "I am Elandra, once abbess of this house. I sang to the gods when they still listened. When they turned away, I sang to the silence. And the silence answered." He glanced at the bodies. "These your choir?" "They came to me seeking peace," she said softly. "I gave it to them. They will not wake until the world ends." "That's not peace," Geralt said. "That's death." "Death is mercy, Witcher. The world is crueler." He took a step forward. "Whatever answered your song, it's using you, feeding through you." She tilted her head. "And if it is, what then? The dead do not weep." The harp began to play again, no hands touching it. The air thickened, filled with sound. Geralt felt it in his bones, a thrumming that stole breath and thought. The statues around them began to move, stone cracking, eyes opening to pale light. "Not again," he muttered. He drew a sign with his left hand. "Ard!" The blast of force shattered the nearest statue, scattering fragments. The others advanced.
their movements slow but relentless. He cut through one, then another, the clang of stone on steel echoing through the abbey. Elandra's voice rose above the din. "Lay down your sword. Join the quiet." Geralt's reply was another swing, the silver blade cleaving through the strings of the harp. The music faltered. A scream, not human, ripped through the hall. The statues froze, their light fading. Elandra staggered, clutching her chest. "You don't understand," she gasped. "Without the song, the silence will hunger. Let it starve." He cast Igni. Fire roared, racing up the shattered harp, licking across the floor, the air filled with the scent of burning dust. Elandra's form shimmered, dissolving into ash that drifted upward like snow. When the flames died, only the ruined harp remained, blackened and still. Geralt stood among the fallen statues, the echo of the song fading from his ears. Outside, the mist began to lift, and sunlight spilled across the valley. He found Roach waiting patiently at the wood's edge. As he mounted, a movement caught his eye, figures emerging from the trees below. The villagers, their eyes wide, their steps uncertain, freed. He nodded once and turned north. The wind carried with it the faintest trace of music, nothing more than a memory fading with each hoofbeat. By nightfall he reached a hill overlooking the valley. The abbey below was a black silhouette against the snow, smoke rising from its ruins. He made camp beneath an oak, setting a small fire. As he sharpened his sword, he thought of the priest's words. "The gods have gone silent." Perhaps that was true, or perhaps they still spoke, only men no longer listened. Geralt stared into the flames until they blurred into embers. Then he lay back, one hand resting on the hilt of his blade, and let sleep take him beneath the cold stars, knowing that somewhere beyond the hills, another whisper was already waiting. The stars were fading when Geralt woke. The fire had died to gray ash, and frost glittered on his cloak. He rose stiffly, stretched, and listened. The world was still. Only the slow creak of trees and the distant cry of crows broke the silence. It was the kind of dawn that carried no promise, only endurance. He saddled Roach and rode on. The road bent east, climbing through low hills toward the foothills of the Mahakam Range. Old trade routes once passed here, but they had fallen quiet with the snows and wars. Along the ridges he saw the remnants of old watchtowers, stone husks left to crumble. By midday the wind sharpened, carrying the smell of smoke. Geralt slowed, eyes narrowing. Ahead, a village clung to the hillside, its chimneys still coughing black clouds into the sky. As he neared, he saw why. Half the houses were burned, their roofs caved in, snow melted to mud around the ashes. A pyre smoldered in the square, sending sparks into the gray air. A handful of survivors moved among the ruins. Thin men, women wrapped in blankets, faces hollow from hunger and grief. A guard with a scarred spear stood watch near the well. When he saw Geralt, he raised the weapon warily. "Keep moving, stranger," the man called. "We've had enough monsters for one lifetime." Geralt reined in Roach. "I'm not the kind that burns villages. What happened here?" The guard hesitated, then lowered his spear slightly. "You're a witcher, aren't you? I've heard of your kind. Then you know I deal in monsters." "Aye. Well, you'll find one here if you're bold enough to look. We called it the Ash Fiend. Came with the storm a week past. Walks by night, sets the houses aflame with no fire, no torch. Leaves nothing but cinders." Geralt dismounted, tying Roach to the trough. "Anyone seen it clearly?" The guard shook his head. "Only smoke and screams. The alderman swore he saw a figure in the blaze, tall, black as soot, eyes like coals. He's dead now. Where's the alderman buried? The guard pointed toward the hill beyond the fields. We buried him deep, but his house still stands barely. Geralt nodded. I'll start there. The alderman's house was half collapsed, its timbers charred and roof sagging. The air still smelled faintly of smoke. Inside, ashes coated the floor. He crouched by the hearth, examining the blackened stones. Something shimmered faintly there, a residue of magic, invisible to the eye but sharp to a witcher's senses. He drew a knife and scraped the soot. Beneath it, the stone bore faint runes, protection sigils, half burned. They'd been drawn wrong, not by ignorance, but by corruption. Whoever had made them had twisted their purpose. Fire that walks, Geralt muttered, not born of tinder or spark, something bound then broken. He heard a step behind him. Turning, he saw a woman standing in the doorway, young, wrapped in a soot-stained cloak, her face streaked with tears. You shouldn't be here, she said. Neither should you, Geralt replied. You live here? I'm Mara. The alderman was my father. He studied her expression. You saw the creature? She hesitated, glancing toward the ruined hearth. I saw something. My father tried to keep it out. He used to pray by the fire every night. Said the flames kept him safe, but that night the fire answered. Answered how? It rose up, spoke his name. Her voice broke. He screamed, and then the house caught. Geralt's medallion quivered against his chest. You said he prayed by the fire. To whom? To the eternal flame. We used to trade with priests from Novigrad. Father thought their god would protect us better than the old spirits. Geralt sighed. He must have bought one of their relics. Some of those aren't relics at all. They're fragments. Fragments of what? Something that shouldn't have been bound to faith. He searched the ruins again and found it. Half buried beneath fallen stone, a small iron brazier, its surface etched with spirals that pulsed faintly red. Even cold, it radiated heat. He lifted it carefully, wrapping it in cloth. Mara watched him. What will you do? End it. If I can, then I'll help. Geralt shook his head. No, stay with your people. When night falls, don't light a fire. Not a candle, not a torch. Understand? She nodded reluctantly. By dusk, the village was dark. The wind carried the smell of rain mixed with ash. Geralt placed the brazier at the edge of the square and drew a circle of salt and sigils around it. When he struck flint, the flames leapt high at once, white and hungry. The runes blazed to life. The brazier trembled, and it spoke, a low, rasping voice as if the fire itself breathed. Witcher, it said, do you come to worship? I've no gods, Geralt answered. Only work. Then burn with me. The flames burst outward, coiling into the shape of a man, tall, featureless, a being of pure fire. It strode forward, each step turning snow to steam. Geralt's medallion shuddered violently. He drew silver, though he knew silver would melt if he misstepped. You're bound to this relic, he said. Who tied you to it? The faithful, the creature hissed. They fed me with prayers. They begged for warmth in winter, and I gave it. Now I take it back. It lunged. Geralt rolled aside, the ground charring beneath him. He struck with Igni, not to burn, but to disrupt. Flame met flame, the clash lighting the night. Sparks rained like stars. Yrden, he shouted, casting the sign. The glyph flared beneath the creature's feet, slowing its advance. The fire dimmed, revealing a core within, a heart of molten metal pulsing like a forge. Geralt darted forward, plunging his sword into the heart. The blade sang, heating instantly. The creature screamed, a sound that shook the mountains. The brazier shattered. The fire collapsed inward, sucked into itself until only embers remained. Geralt stood in the sudden darkness, the sword's edge glowing dull red. Around him the snow hissed and steamed. From the shadows, the villagers crept forward. Mara was among them, her eyes wide. "Is it gone?" "For now," Geralt said. "But bury what's left deep and never pray to fire again." She nodded, tears freezing on her cheeks. "You saved us." He sheathed his blade. "No, you'll save yourselves if you learn." He left before dawn as smoke rose once more from the chimneys, this time from hearths, not ruins. The mountains loomed ahead, sharp against the pale sky. Another village behind him. Another curse ended, or at least delayed. The wind picked up as he rode, scattering sparks from the dying fires. Somewhere beyond the ridges thunder rolled, distant, yet familiar. Geralt glanced toward the sound and murmured under his breath, "Silver, against the darkness. Always." Then he spurred Roach onward, and the path swallowed him once more. The mountains loomed vast and cold as Geralt crossed into their shadow, the air thinning, sharp with frost. Peaks pierced the clouds like the spines of ancient beasts, and the valleys between them were filled with mist that moved like slow-breathing smoke. The path wound narrow and treacherous, lined with pine and stone. He rode until the sun sank behind the peaks, and twilight turned the snow blue. By nightfall he found a cavern cut into the cliffside, a hollow once used by miners long abandoned. He tethered Roach near the entrance and built a fire from dry pine. The flames threw restless shadows across the rock, and for a time the Witcher simply listened to the crackle of wood, the sigh of wind, the distant echo of falling water deep within the mountain. He was tired. More than he would admit, the road from Dunlow to these frozen heights had been long, and though his wounds healed, the weight of the dead never did. Every village left behind felt like a page torn from a story that never ended. When sleep came, it was uneasy. He dreamed of the marshes, of Elira's face flickering in the firelight, her voice whispering all things return to the earth. Then the light shifted and her eyes became pale and endless, the eyes of something vast, buried beneath the world. He woke to silence. The fire had burned low. Only the faintest ember glowed in the dark. Geralt sat up, his medallion vibrating faintly. Something was near. He rose, drawing his steel blade. The sword sang softly as it left the sheath. He moved to the cave mouth, peering out. The night was still, the sky thick with stars, the air sharp enough to bite. Then he heard it, a low hum, distant but rising. Not the wind, not an echo, a voice, many voices chanting. He followed the sound down a narrow trail that led deeper into the mountain's throat. The passage widened into a chasm lit by torches. Below, in a hollow filled with stone pillars, figures in dark robes knelt around a pit that glowed with red light. The air shimmered with heat. Geralt crouched behind a boulder, watching. The chant rose and fell like waves. He counted at least a dozen of them, their leader standing at the edge of the pit. His hood was thrown back, revealing a face carved with scars and eyes burning with fervor. "The flame is eternal," the man cried. It devours the false and purifies the world. The vein beneath us stirs once more, and through it the gods shall be reborn. Geralt's stomach tightened. He had heard that name before, the vein. Malgrim had spoken of it, so had the sorcerer at Blackbriar Keep. It was no mere myth. Something beneath these mountains tied all the horrors together. He descended silently, keeping to the shadows. The closer he came, the stronger the vibration of his medallion grew. Heat radiated from the pit, searing even through his cloak. When he glanced inside, he saw not fire, but movement. Molten rock pulsing like a living heart. The cult leader raised his arms. "Let the vessel come forth." 2 acolytes dragged a figure into the circle, a young man bound in chains, his mouth gagged. The leader drew a knife of black iron. Geralt moved then. He struck fast, steel flashing in the torchlight. 1 acolyte fell before he even cried out. The other turned, reaching for a blade, but Geralt's boot caught him in the chest, sending him sprawling into the dust. The chanting broke into chaos. "Witcher!" someone screamed. Geralt spun, slashing through a second, then a third. Sparks flew as sword met blade, the clang echoing off the stone. The leader turned, fury twisting his face. "You meddle in sacred fire," he bellowed. "Looks more like madness to me." The man gestured sharply. Flame erupted from the ground, coiling into serpents of living heat. Geralt leapt aside, rolling behind a fallen pillar as the fire lashed past. He drew the sign of Quen, the shield flashing gold around him. "You cannot stop the awakening," the cultist cried. "The vein is eternal." "Then I'll cut it out of the world." He surged forward, sword raised. The cult leader swung the black blade, their weapons meeting in a burst of sparks. The heat was unbearable now, the air thick with the stench of sulfur. Geralt feinted left, then drove his sword through the man's chest. The leader gasped, eyes wide, and laughed. "Fool," he whispered, "you've only hastened it." The ground shuddered. Cracks split the rock. The red glow beneath brightened until it was blinding. Geralt ripped his blade free and grabbed the chained captive, hauling him back toward the tunnel. The cultists fled, their cries lost in the roar that followed. The pit burst open, spewing molten fire. From it rose a shape vast and terrible, neither beast nor god, but something of both. A face formed in the molten rock, eyes like twin suns. "Witcher," the voice rumbled, shaking the cavern. "You carry the scent of those who broke my rest." Geralt's medallion thrashed. He set the captive down behind him, drew his silver blade, and whispered, "You'll find I'm not fond of gods." The creature laughed, a sound like mountains grinding together. "Then burn with the rest." Flames surged. Geralt dodged, rolling across the stone, his cloak catching fire. He tore it free, slashing at the creature's arm, a column of molten rock that hissed when cut. The silver glowed white-hot, but it held. "Yrden," he shouted, carving the sign across the ground. The glyph flared violet, spreading beneath the creature. Its movement slowed, the lava hardening where it touched the circle. Geralt seized the moment, striking again, driving his sword deep into the glowing chest. The world erupted. Heat blinded him. The sound was like thunder, tearing the sky. Then silence. When he opened his eyes, the cavern was still. The pit had cooled to black stone. Only ashes remained of the cultists. He staggered to his feet, retrieved his sword, and found the young man unconscious but breathing. The medallion was still now, utterly still. Outside, dawn broke over the peaks. The first light spilled across the snow, pure and cold. Geralt led the freed captive down the trail, neither speaking. When they reached the valley, the man looked back once at the mountain and whispered, "What was that?" Geralt mounted Roach. "Something that should have stayed buried." The man nodded. "And will it rise again?" Geralt glanced toward the distant horizon. "Things like that always do. The trick is being there when they do." He rode on, the snow crunching beneath hooves, the air clean once more. Above, the mountains stood silent, hiding whatever secrets they had left. For now the darkness slept, and the Witcher, his silver sword dulled by battle, his heart steady as stone, rode into the pale morning, the endless path stretching before him like a wound that would never heal.